Tonight at 10, the Queen's doctors advise her not to travel to the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow. The 95-year-old monarch, who spent time in hospital last week, has been advised to rest at Windsor Castle. Meanwhile, in Glasgow, final preparations are being made for the gathering of many prominent figures at the summit, and the message is clear.
If we don't act now, it will be too late.
We'll be speaking to Sir David Attenborough about what's at stake at the forthcoming COP26 summit, also tonight. A pay rise for public sector workers, but the detail will not be known until next year. Experts say there are signs that numbers of new COVID cases are beginning to even out and dropping slightly in England. Ministers now say they will force water companies to make a progressive reduction in the sewage that's dumped in seas and rivers. And many tributes to a legend of Scottish football, the manager Walter Smith, who's died at the age of 73.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, a good night for England as they maintain their perfect record in Women's World Cup qualifying, thrashing Latvia 10-0.
Good evening. The Queen has accepted the advice of doctors and decided not to attend the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow, which starts on Sunday. Her Majesty, who's 95, spent a night in hospital last week, and her doctors have recommended some rest. The COP26 summit will be a major gathering of world leaders, and the Queen had been expected to play a prominent role there in welcoming those attending. Instead, she will be recording a special message to show to delegates, as our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond reports.
This time last week, a reception for business leaders at Windsor. Then, a trip to Northern Ireland was cancelled and a visit to the hospital substituted. Today it was back to official engagements, where a beaming Queen gave a virtual audience to the new Korean ambassador. But this evening, a palace statement. Her Majesty has regretfully decided she will no longer travel to Glasgow to attend the evening reception of COP26. Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception, but will deliver an address to the assembled delegates via a recorded video message.
I'm quite sure what she's got at the back of her mind is that she wants to be absolutely fine and fighting fit on November the 14th, which is Remembrance Sunday. That is the most sacred day in her calendar. But I think to go to Glasgow, to stand in a room full of coughing, wheezing delegates from all over the world is probably an engagement too far.
The message from the palace tonight: remain calm. The Queen is still carrying out official engagements. She spoke to the Chancellor about his budget just a few hours ago, and she will address the delegates to the conference, albeit by video. The journey to Glasgow, however, was just too long for her doctor's liking. The climate change conference is close to the Queen's heart. When opening the Welsh Senedd a couple of weeks ago, she was overheard complaining about those who hadn't said whether they'd turn up. And the Queen's absence is a blow for the conference and its organiser, the government. Meeting the Queen is an experience few turn down, even fewer forget. Her absence will take a little shine off a meeting beset with challenges. Johnny Diamond, BBC News.
Let's go live to Windsor Castle tonight, and our correspondent Helena Wilkinson, who's there. Helena, given the stresses and strains of travelling all the way to Glasgow, maybe this decision wasn't really much of a surprise.
I think you're absolutely right, Huw. Not a surprise. It was always going to be a possibility, given the Queen is 95, given the fact she had to cancel her trip to Northern Ireland last week, and also given the fact she had to stay overnight in hospital last Wednesday for those preliminary tests. But it's clear that doctors feel that it would have been too much, too exhausting for the Queen to travel to Glasgow and attend what is going to be a huge summit with global leaders. Her Majesty is here at Windsor Castle Castle this evening, and we understand in the coming days she will continue to carry out lighter duties as she has been doing since she was discharged from hospital last Thursday. But she is a Queen who likes to be seen, likes to be out with people. No doubt, though, questions going forward about just how much travel she carries out across the country in the future. Huw.
Helena, thanks very much once again for the latest thoughts there at Windsor Castle. Helena Wilkinson. Now, millions of public sector workers will get a pay rise next year. The government says it will lift the pay freeze introduced last November, with nurses, teachers and members of the armed forces among those set to benefit. But the precise increase will not be known until next spring, and it'll depend on recommendations from independent pay review bodies. The government won't confirm whether the pay rises will be above the rate of inflation. Labour says that tax and price rises mean that families are facing a cost of living crisis. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, has more details.
Look very carefully. Promises may not be exactly what they appear. It's nearly budget time, and there are plenty of vows and pledges around.
And we're going to start off by drawing some right-angled triangles.
Teachers in the classroom are just some of 2.5 million public sector staff who've had their pay frozen in England. That technical limit will disappear next year. Welcome in theory, but union reps want to know exactly what that will mean in practice.
I think we have to wait and see what they're actually going to propose in terms of a wage increase. Because if it's not in line with the rate of inflation and the national insurance rise, anything less than that is going to be a kick in the teeth.
Before he's even back on the steps with the red box tomorrow, the Chancellor's already come up with a long list of what sound like goodies. After the shock of the pandemic, it seems the economy's returning to something like normal with more vigour than expected. But the politician, who wants the red box for Labour, says check the terms and conditions.
Are these pay rises going to match the rising cost of living with inflation set to reach 4 or even 5%? And second, where does this money come from? Will it come from the departmental budgets, which means there's less money than for the other things that schools and hospitals and the police force need to pay for? Or is the Chancellor going to provide new money to pay for this welcome increase in public sector pay?
The cash for extra wages will come out of each department's pot of money, rather than any extra from number 11. And the size of any wage rise isn't set yet.
The pay review bodies for nurses, for police, etc., and teachers will go away. They'll consider over the next few months what's the appropriate recommendation to government. They will then recommend that to the Chancellor, and then he'll announce that early next year.
We won't know for months how much extra teachers, firefighters, nurses, or anyone else whose wages are paid by the taxpayer will actually get. And we won't know until tomorrow how much in total the Chancellor wants to spend on the different parts of the public sector, whether that's education, defence, care or anything else. So much of what we've heard so far from the Chancellor about the budget is political signalling. And it's the small print when he's on his feet in the House of Commons tomorrow that really counts.
Order.
And the big headlines out there have already raised heckles in here.
This House will not be taken for granted. It is not right for everybody to be briefed. It's not more important to go on the news in the morning. It's more important to come here.
But the Chancellor's chosen to warm up for his big budget day with a canine audience. He'll hail a new age of optimism, yet he may find a more hostile audience in the morning. Laura Kuensberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So tomorrow, as we know now, is Budget Day at Westminster, and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak is said to be keen to set something of a new direction rather than continuing to borrow money to prop up the economy as he's had to do during the pandemic. He will instead apparently try to show that he can manage the books and rein in spending. But with food and energy prices rising, demand for support is high, as Faisal Islam, our economics editor, tells us.
Underpinning every budget is a precision judgment about the state of the economy, and that's never been more, well, complicated. Cube Precision, an engineering company in Dudley in the West Midlands, like many other businesses around the country, has rebounded impressively in recent months. But now the pressure's on, prices and wages are on the rise.
Day-to-day living for our staff is getting more expensive, which means they'd like to earn more money. In order for us to do that, we have to increase our prices to customers. But we have to take into mind that energy prices are going up as well, and also that next year national insurance will be going up.
Rishi Sunak will be keen to show how well the economy has rebounded in recent months. The UK is currently the fastest growing major economy, but the sharp rebound in percentage terms has, in part, been driven by the huge fall of last year. What happens next with supply and worker shortages, rising prices and interest rates is tricky to predict. So the shape of the economy being revealed tomorrow has both its treats and its tricks. At Tully's Pumpkin Patch in Sussex, business is thriving, but consumer concerns are very real.
The weekly budget at the moment is very tight, with the cost going up of energy.
Pumpkins are going up. Pumpkin soup has never been so expensive.
When I go and do my shopping, the bill is just it's soaring.
The message from here at least is that people expect help with rising prices at this budget. And although we've heard a series of very large sounding announcements already, many of those are about long-term investment spending, or they reflect announcements already made, or in the case of public sector pay, we just don't know how much the rise is going to be. That's because a chancellor that spent nearly 2 years spending and borrowing hundreds of billions of pounds in the pandemic rescue wants to draw a line under that. This budget is about showing a government in control of how much it borrows.
I want this one.
Budgets traditionally have a surprise to please the crowd. There are, though, less happy risks already lurking in the economic numbers.
And Faisal is with me. So as that speech is being delivered tomorrow, Faisal, what are you listening out for?
So this idea of a new era of economic optimism, that's a long-term vision for the Chancellor, looking to upskill the population, justify higher wages over the long term. It's rooted in sound public finances, bearing down on these deficits. So the Chancellor will feel like perhaps a very different Chancellor to the one we've become used to, no longer borrowing hundreds of billions, spending hundreds of billions and taxing tens of billions. But it's also showtime in terms of this challenge of levelling up, that spreading wealth around the regions of the UK, because it should be there in the numbers in a 3-year spending plan. You should be able to see some of that. Likewise, the plan for net zero in terms of climate change, but also with all these long-term plans, there's that short-term challenge. Families facing a cost of living issue, they'll want to know what help is out there, and that is perhaps the key question tomorrow.
We'll talk again tomorrow, Faisal. Thanks very much. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor. The former Conservative Minister, Owen Paterson, has defended his conduct after the Parliamentary Standards Watchdog recommended that he be suspended from the House of Commons for 30 days. In a report, the regulator said the MP had repeatedly broken lobbying rules while working as a paid consultant for 2 firms. But Mr Paterson denied wrongdoing, saying that he was trying to alert the authorities to carcinogenic substances in milk and ham. After concerns about rising COVID infection levels in the UK, there are signs that numbers of new cases are beginning to even out and dropping slightly in England. One of the developers of the AstraZeneca vaccine has told a committee of MPs that the situation is improving. But 263 COVID-related deaths were recorded today across the UK. That's the highest number since February. Our health editor Huw Pym has more details.
There's a new push to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds in England this week, with bookings possible at vaccination hubs during half-term. And there was no shortage of takers at this centre in Walsall.
At first it was a bit scary, but then when you actually have the jab, there wasn't that much pain, so then I relaxed a little bit after.
We've all in this together, we've all got to take our part, including the children. And I think it's very important as well that the schools don't have the pressure of getting the children vaccinated.
But in Nottingham, with walk-ins for booster jabs now possible, there was a more downbeat mood.
The Delta variant is such a worry and the NHS is under so much pressure. We've really got to do everything that we can to help.
Those of us who are being a bit more sensible are having to go along with this booster just to try to protect us a little bit extra.
Presiding Officer, in giving
Scotland's First Minister, meanwhile, was stressing the need for continued caution.
At our meeting today, the Cabinet agreed to make no change to the current regulations that are in place. This reflects our assessment that, although the situation has greatly improved since August, it does remain fragile as we head into the winter period.
So where do things go from here with COVID? Well, scientists and modellers say there's still a lot of uncertainty, but some take the view that partly because of the continued vaccine rollout, case numbers may stabilise and perhaps fall back a bit. One of the leading players in the development of vaccines noted that while the virus was still spreading, he believed the outlook was a bit brighter.
We are in an improving situation because of high vaccination coverage that we have. The booster program will start limiting even further the number of cases and particularly those hospitalised cases. And actually there's lots of infection that's happened in the community which is boosting lots of the younger people as well, including children.
But whatever happens with COVID, hospitals around the UK are under serious pressure, with a backlog of routine work which has built up. And with concerns about flu, there are predictions of a very challenging winter ahead for the NHS. Huw Edwards, BBC News.
And turning to the latest official figures, they show there were 40,954 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That's about 3,000 fewer cases than last Tuesday. And it means an average of 44,702 new cases were reported per day in the past week. There were 8,693 people in hospital with COVID as of yesterday. As I mentioned earlier, 263 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, and it follows unusually low reported figures over the weekend. On average in the past week, 140 related deaths were recorded every day. And then on vaccinations, some 6.4 million people are reported to have received their booster jab, and that does include third doses for those with certain health conditions. The United Nations is warning that global plans to cut carbon fall far short of what is needed to stop dangerous climate change. It says national pledges will fail to keep the global temperature increase this century below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Sir David Attenborough has added his voice to the debate, warning that if we don't act now, it will, in his words, be too late. He says the richest nations need to meet their moral responsibility by helping the most vulnerable. He took a break from filming his new series that'll be aired next year to speak to our science editor, David Shookman.
Action, David! If you get up and walk away as if you were going back to that tree.
A trusted figure, recognised globally, Sir David Attenborough will play a key role at the COP26 Climate Summit. And ahead of the event, we caught up with him at Kew Gardens, filming his new series, The Green Planet, to air next year.
This is a battlefield. Its tendrils are highly sensitive to touch.
Programmes use high-tech cameras to reveal the battles in the undergrowth.
Got it.
Well, they're all old friends, aren't they? It's the nice thing.
And he told me with his usual enthusiasm about the results.
You can build up a sequence into a real drama, so you really feel that that particular plant is hell-bent on strangling some other plant, which they often are, of course.
The Attenborough message is that plants aren't just fascinating to look at, they're essential for tackling climate change. And he says that time is now running out for the richest countries in particular to take action.
It would be really catastrophic if the developed nations of the world, the more powerful nations of the world, simply ignored these problems. Do we say, oh, it's nothing to do with us and because our arms? We caused it. Our kind of industrialization is one of the major factors in producing this change in climate. We have a moral responsibility, even if we didn't cause it, we would have a moral responsibility to do something about thousands of men, women and children who have lost everything. Can we just goodbye and say it was no business of ours? You have to believe there's still things to be done about it. And I believe there are. The question is, on a world scale, when is it too late? But it's difficult to see. If we don't act now, it will be too late.
And action, David.
I watched you filming almost non-stop for 5 hours this morning. You're 95. It's an incredibly impressive sight. What are you planning next?
Well, I don't plan very far ahead. As you say, I'm 95. How long can you go on? It isn't within our gift to say those things or to know those things. All I know is that if I get up tomorrow and I feel that I'm able to do a decent day's work, then I should jolly well do it.
And with the talks in Glasgow starting next week, he clearly feels a sense of duty to keep pressing global leaders to put the world on a safer course. David Shrookman, BBC News.
The government now says it will force water companies to make a progressive reduction in the sewage dumped in rivers and seas, following criticism by the House of Lords. Peers proposed a change to the Environment Bill last week, but that didn't win enough support from MPs. And following widespread criticism, ministers have now promised to impose new legal controls. Zoe Conway reports.
This is untreated sewage being released into Langstone Harbour in Hampshire. The footage was shot last Thursday. The sewage poured out of it for 49 hours straight.
The concern is not just the faecal matter that's coming out through that sewage treatment plant, it's full of chemicals as well. All the chemicals we use every day that are underneath our sinks, and we keep them locked away from our children because they're toxic, they come out here.
The sewage came from here, the Budds Farm treatment plant run by Southern Water. It's currently allowed to discharge what the company says is heavily diluted wastewater into the harbour during heavy rainfall. This prevents it backing up and causing flooding. It's not clear yet whether this 49-hour spill will be considered to be legal or not. Southern Water was fined £90 million for unlawful discharges in July. But it's not just in Hampshire that this is happening. A sewage treatment plant less than a mile from where I'm standing in Wallingford in Oxfordshire discharged untreated sewage into this stretch of the River Thames for 993 hours last year. The government has been under pressure from people taking to the streets and from inside Parliament to ensure that water companies are legally required to reduce sewage discharges. Tonight, the government gave in.
We've listened to the debate that took place in Parliament, so we will write what is already government policy into the statutes to give people that reassurance they seek.
What everyone agrees on is that Britain's Victorian water system needs fixing, but it will cost billions and billions to do so. Zoe Conway, BBC News.
The UK says it will cooperate fully with the authorities in Kenya in relation to the death of a woman nearly a decade ago. Agnes Wanjiru was found dead in central Kenya in 2012 after she had reportedly been at a hotel near a British Army base. An inquest in Kenya concluded that she'd been murdered by British soldiers, as our correspondent Ferdinand Amondi reports now.
The pain of delayed justice and the revival of an episode Rose would rather forget. 9 years after her 21-year-old sister Agnes was killed, Rose is still haunted by the mystery of her death and the fact that no one has been held accountable. The killer, who she believes to be a British Army soldier, is still a free man.
I'd like to ask if it was my late sister who had killed that white person. By now, I wouldn't even know where she's jailed. But whoever killed her went free and is living his life. I am raising her child alone.
Agnes went missing from this hotel in Nanyuki in March 2012 after spending the evening with British soldiers. It took 3 months to find her body. After stalled investigations, 7 years after Agnes was killed, the magistrate in the Kenyan inquest into her death concluded that it was her opinion that Agnes was murdered by British soldiers. This is a spot where Agnes Wanjiru was buried in a public cemetery here in Nanyuki about 9 years ago. The overgrown sisal leaves perhaps representing how long the family has and continues to wait for justice. Now, the Sunday Times newspaper reports that another soldier who says he was present at the hotel that evening claims the soldier who killed her confessed, but he says the army failed to investigate.
Ask you, in light of the...
Today, the British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told a select committee that the investigation into Agnes's death was being led by Kenyan police and insisted the Ministry of Defence would fully cooperate if asked.
To date, we have not had a formal MLA, a mutual legal assistance request from the Kenyan authorities in that, but we did support them at the time, and there is no obstruction from the MOD or the Army on this side of the House.
The British Army retains a permanent training base in Nanyuki. For decades, locals have complained about the behavior of British soldiers, but the training unit says they are committed to upholding the highest standards and that it continues to play a positive role in the community. Agnes Wanjiru's family had started believing her death would go unpunished. They want the reopened wounds to heal, this time for good. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News, Nanyuki.
Walter Smith, the former Scotland and Rangers manager, one of the most successful managers in the history of Scottish football, has died at the age of 73. Rangers said that he was a club legend who would be greatly missed by the fans. And our correspondent Alistair Lamont reports now.
Celebrating success was something Walter Smith and Rangers did a lot of, his time at Ibrox littered with trophies. Outside the stadium today, the sense of loss was both deep and personal.
He was Mr. Rangers, he was everybody's Rangers dad. It's not just the passing of a man, he was a legend.
He wasn't a family member.
He began coaching at a young age, joining the Graham Souness revolution at Rangers before becoming manager in 1991. His legendary status at the club was sealed when Rangers matched Celtic's feat of 9 straight title wins. Even his magic touch couldn't revive the fortunes of an ailing Everton, and so in 2004 he returned to Scotland as manager of the national team. But the lure of his beloved Rangers was strong, and when he was asked back, he couldn't say no. 3 more league titles followed. Walter Smith's influence was most keenly felt here, but he did transcend both Rangers and Scottish football. Tributes have come today from Celtic, from Sir Kenny Dalglish, from Sir Alex Ferguson, and also from Pep Guardiola and David Moyes, to name but a few.
Walter was an incredible leader, a very successful manager here at Rangers. I think he epitomised everything that this club stands for. His DNA is all over the club, and it's obviously very sad news.
Scotland has lost one of its most remarkable sons. There is a poignancy, though, that he lived long enough to see Rangers once again crowned Scottish champions.
Today's tributes to the former Scotland and Rangers manager Walter Smith, who's died at the age of 73. That's it from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.